And now it gives me great pleasure to invite back on stage our moderator for the panel discussion. Please welcome Mr. Andreas Sohmen-Pao. Mr. Sohmen-Pao, please. And now we would like to invite our other panelists. First, we have the Managing Director of Pacific International Alliance, Mr. S.S. Teo. Mr. Teo, please. Panelists joining us on stage, may we invite the Chief Economist and Managing Director for Economic and Currency Research, DBS Bank, Mr. David Carbon. Mr. Carbon, please. Ladies and gentlemen, our topic for today is steering through challenging times. How can organizations survive the downturn and seek new opportunities? We'd also like to invite our audience members to use Pigeonhole Live to submit your questions during the panel discussion. And also, we would like to have your votes for the poll that we would like you to take as well. So with that, I'd like to hand over to our moderator, Mr. Sohmen-Pao. Sir?
Thank you very much. I see your questions coming in already on the screen here, and so I will try to present them to coincide with the topic that we're discussing. But we don't have to be too stuck on technology, so if you have a burning question on a topic we're covering, you can feel free to raise your hand in the time-honored fashion, and we can take questions from the floor as well. Let me start by asking the panelists, do you think this is just another normal cycle, or are there fundamental differences this time around? And perhaps I can start by asking that to Christian, because some people are talking about fundamental changes in the oil industry in terms of renewables. I know you said that probably won't be a big part in the future, or for the foreseeable future, but do you see some fundamental changes in this cycle? And I think I would ask the same question of you, SS, given that trade growth is slowing and we're not seeing the same multipliers that we used to in the past. Just another normal cycle or something fundamentally different?
I think it is a somewhat abnormal cycle because it will be deep and long, and that is caused by this dramatic fall in the oil price at the time when we had got used to a very high oil price, and therefore we needed that high oil price until we got this dramatic fall in the costs. And that is happening, and that is helping shorten the downturn. But remember, we got into it, as I said in my talk, we got into it with an exceptionally imbalance of supply. The industry had built too much rigs, too much vessels, too many vessels. And that came, of course, on the back of an exceptionally long upturn. We had many, many years of very good years, and everybody who could creep and walk, they ordered. There were plenty of brokers who were helping the shipyard to fill the orders, and any owner or newcomer who could actually patch this together and get the contract, or even build it on speculation by taking advantage of the liquid financial markets and investment markets, they all jumped on the bandwagon, and as a result we have an exceptional surplus of equipment. Therefore, that's another fundamental difference here.
Right. SS?
You know, you're asking what cycle are we in? Is it a normal cycle? In fact, I told my colleagues that maybe almost 2 years ago, every morning when I wake up, hoping that oil price will go down. Right? And now when I wake up, I hope the oil price is going up. I just don't understand the logic, but I think what has happened as Christians is that we are so used to high energy costs, and to me there is a this so-called whether you call it a bubble built around it, you know, with high building of, you know, OSV jackups and all that. and together with high coal price and all that. What I really felt is that now we are, I hate to use the word new normal, started by the Chinese, but we are into a different cycle. When the Chinese announced a 6.7% increase in first quarter, people were, they say it's the lowest growth in the past 12 quarters. Right? Singapore just reported a 1.8% growth in GDP for first quarter, which is not a bad number. Yet our export for non-oil in March dropped by 15.5%. So again, I think we have to go back to me it's always go back to basic. Is that we have to learn how to live with using less energy, more efficient, and we have new source of energy coming up. The shale gas, the shale oil. In fact, today the shale gas, shale oil not only from the US. I was in Chongqing. We came back on Sunday, and the whole reserve of shale gas in China, 80% is in Chongqing. And the new technology can make it easier to explore. And if that happens, you're going to cut out all the, the oil, a lot of oil transportation can be taken over. So I think we have to live with the new normal, the new situation, and adjust our expectation. We will take out some of the inflationary pressure, which by right should be good, for the public. But you look at even rubber price is now 1/4 what it used to be a year ago, and farmers are suffering. So I think we really have to readjust, and to me really it's actually innovation. Businesses have to innovate to get used to the situation. So I think we are into a different cycle, different type of growth, but we will definitely see growth.
So in Christian and SS's answers, you're alluding to a couple of things. One is this excess liquidity that we've seen globally for a while. I'm going to come on now to the economist's point of view, because we have been living for a number of years with this excess liquidity, which is fueling asset acquisitions and oversupply. And SS also talking about this specifically as a problem in China. How do you see this, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, the liquidity issue is one side of it. I speak for a second on that, but I'd like to come back to the real growth side first, if I may. We talk about, is this a normal cycle and so on, when are we going to come out of this? And you talked about slower growth as we move out into the future and so on. I don't think there's any question that the global economy, if you're worried about slow growth today, get used to it, because it's probably going to be a little slower and a little slower as we march forward. For Asia, that's normal. The biggest reason growth slows is because incomes are going up. Okay, that's a very good thing. The other reason growth is slowing is population growth is slowing, and populations are getting older, which means working age population is slowing much more rapidly than populations in general, and that's the other factor behind slower growth. But this is the key. In some ways, even though GDP growth is going to be a little slower as we march through time, especially in Asia, in some ways, Asia is really speeding up. All right? What do I mean by this? Even with slower growth, we're putting an awful lot of dollars of growth out there. In the 4 years following the Lehman Brothers collapse, right, basically from the middle of 2008 to the middle of 2012, in some sense the front and the back of the global financial crisis, Asia continued to grow, even with all our ups and downs and our challenges and so on. Asia continued to grow at a pretty decent growth rate, and over that 4-year time period, Asia's growth, the dollar value of that, amounted to an entire Germany. Okay? The biggest crisis in 100 years, with no help from the US, with no help from Europe, with no help from Japan. These countries basically ran flat for 4 years, zero growth. With no help from these guys, and in the middle of the biggest crisis in 100 years, Asia put the equivalent of a Germany on the world's economic map, right here in Asia. All right? It's a big, big deal. We're still putting a lot of growth out there. People say, okay, we did it. We can't do it anymore. Everybody's slowing down. That will never happen again. We are slowing down, but it has happened again, and We are now putting Germany on the map, not in 4 years. Today we're putting a Germany on the map almost every 3 years. Okay? It's a huge amount of growth. 5 years from today, it won't take 3 years to put a Germany on the map. It will take 2.5 years for Asia alone to put a Germany on the map. In 2025, 9 years from today, Asia will be putting a Germany on the map almost every 2 years. We always miss up this kind of cycle and the structure here. We're in the middle of a bit of a downturn cycle and everybody's looking at the oil price and so on, and we think it's never going to end. But cycles have happened forever and they will happen forever, and we kind of miss the picture here when we think about the structure. We don't think about that like we should. We're putting Germany after Germany after Germany on the map, and even with a slower and slower and slower growth rate, the rate at which we're putting Germany's on the map is becoming faster and faster and faster because the base is growing. Don't mix up the cycle and the structure. This is a big, big deal. It's the biggest structural change going on in the global economy today, and it's happening right before our eyes, even though all we can see is the low oil price and so on.
I have some more questions, but I think at this stage I want to turn to some of the questions from all of you. And with Pigeonhole, we have this voting system where we get to see which are the most burning questions amongst the audience. One of which, at the top of the leaderboard now, is a question about costs, because Christian, you talked quite a bit about the importance of the industry to manage costs down and some of the successes specifically in the offshore industry. Singapore obviously needs to be thinking about its attractiveness to the maritime industry, and how do we sort of succeed in being attractive if costs continue to escalate. Could you say some words about Singapore in relation to Siem Industries, or how you think about the cost of different locations?
Well, I'm full of admiration of Singapore. To start there, we have an office in Singapore. Subsea 7 has one. It's a center in the Far East that is serving us very well with all the infrastructure and everything that's needed, so you are very well positioned. The cost is not escalating. The cost is coming down, and my point is that I am actually impressed that cost has already come down for the industry so well.
But in terms of operating, sorry to interrupt, but in terms of operating location, what sort of factors go into your thinking whether to put a base here or there? Is it an important factor?
Yes, it is, and it is important. What we see, as we are all downsizing for the lower activity that has already happened, we are looking to put centers together and have fewer locations. Mm-hmm. And Singapore is an attractive location, whether the cost of operating in Singapore is competitive or as low as some alternatives, KL or wherever it may be, is a question. But I think predictability has a cost attached to it that is very important. Yes, I think
stable policies are as important
stable
as the
policies
cost.
are very important. Tax is a big issue, of course.
Right.
We see some countries are taxing the industry when they don't make money, even, and you simply cannot stay in those jurisdictions. And from that point of view, Singapore is also attractive.
Yeah. SS, you're chairman of the Singapore Business Federation, so this is something that you think about all the time, I'm sure. What's your perspective on Singapore costs?
Politically, I must say that the cost is high. I think cost is all relative. It depends on what you are doing and what industry you are in. So for some of the businesses, especially the SME, they do find the cost very high, with the physical limitation and also the manpower. And I think that's important to actually, that's why I talk about transformation and innovation. So you have to choose the right growth. And I think innovation and transformation is going on globally. In Asia, it's happening very fast. In fact, especially in countries like China and India. I was told that last month, in fact, the number of robots in China have overtaken the US. So the irony here, you have the most populous country in the world, yet going for automation in a very fast pace. So I think our cost here is high, and I think the government is trying its best to see how we can better manage costs. I don't believe in cost cutting, I believe in cost management. Like the initiative done by the MPA and also the SMOU to help the owners during this difficult period. I think partnership is important. We have to realize our physical limitation and work together. So again, it's up to business to choose where they want to be. We have read, about some of the ONG businesses that you're relocating to neighboring countries who can offer very low cost, but there's compared, they may not have better connectivity, stability, and security. So I think it's all relative, and we're glad that the MAS last week announced they will ease the monetary policy to the surprise a lot of people in order to bring the cost down. So I do think that costs can be managed, but the business and ourselves have to choose the right path and the right way to change.
On this same question of costs, I wanted to ask you, Dave, why are lower energy prices not helping to stimulate economic growth? Because in theory, we should be seeing costs going down for all energy-consuming countries. Why are we not seeing that feeding through to better economic growth at the moment?
Frankly, for US, Germany, and Japan, they're not running terribly slowly, although you read it in the paper every day that they are. Most of these places are pretty close to their potential rates. Falling oil prices has been a big boost to the consumer, and it does help either through better consumption, which we're not seeing so much, or in the case of the US, for example, in terms of repairing, quote-unquote, repairing household balance sheets, building back the savings. So what led to the crisis in the US was a whole lot of consumption and real estate bubble and so on. Households borrowed too much. That all blew up. And now we spent the next 8 years trying to pay back debt, basically. So even though you get these lower oil prices, even though it doesn't show up in a big boost in consumption all of a sudden, it is helping people put their money back in the bank and repair the household balance sheets. When you think about, a lot of people talk about when is growth going to get back to quote-unquote normal, if it's not already, the main factor is always when is the household going to start buying more. And for the last 8 years, they've been trying to repair, build up their savings again. And this is helping them do that in a big way. So it might not show up in the short run, but it is showing up in terms of the household balance sheets, which we can monitor every single quarter. And they've made a heck of a lot of progress in the last 5 or 6 years. We're still not back to where we were 10 years ago, but there's been a whole lot of repair going on there, and that's very good. So you might not see it on the surface, but it's happening under the hood.
Right. SS, you, in your answer about costs, you mentioned that technology, innovation, and so on is one important way to manage costs. And I see one of the other sort of questions that the audience is keen to have an answer on is LNG as a fuel, as a marine fuel. For your business, for the container sector, do you see LNG coming in as a fuel? And then on the same topic of innovation, I wanted to ask whether you, Christian, see a point of diminishing returns on these cost savings and technology and innovation, or whether we're still at the early stages of development. But perhaps on LNG as fuel, SS.
Well, for LNG, in fact, last Monday we had the Lloyd's East Asia Committee meeting in Hong Kong, and this was actually discussed, quite in depth. I think until the oil price, have went down, LNG was an option, partly because of the cost and partly because of environment. But I would think that today, depend on which sector of the shipping industry you're actually fighting for survival. Unfortunately, because of that, I don't think that is actually in many of the owners or operators' mind. And also, we have bunker costs that we always predict wrongly. In fact, a few weeks ago, one of my colleagues joined a panel, and the oil major was asked, "What do you think of the oil price?" He said, "Well, anywhere from 20 to 80." Everybody can say that. So I think it's really the reality is that LNG, unfortunately, at the moment, is at the back of our mind. For most owner operator, it's survival. But we realize that, and also I think for the engine makers, the two major makers, they will have to find a cheaper way to offer either a dual fuel engine. A lot of research can still be done. But we believe that for the coastal shipping, that may actually come first. But you do need a lot of policy support or incentive to make it workable. But the reality is that I think for ship owner today, this is actually maybe the least in their mind.
And what's interesting about that is you're saying because of other pressures, actually some innovation gets pushed back because of the extra cost and so on required. What about in the subsea side and the offshore sector, Christian? You pointed to some of the developments, but do you think that this is still accelerating, or we're starting to max out on technology and cost savings?
No, I think there will be a continuous search for better solutions. And if you look at the industry, as I said, in my working lifetime, it's mind-boggling how this industry has developed, and that will continue. And now we have the fortunate thing about the low oil price and the smaller margins is that the need drives the search for technology even more. As far as LNG is concerned, that is a fact now that in some parts of the world it's not as economical anymore to use LNG because the oil prices come down to such a low level. We have 3 PSVs that are on long-term contracts with different majors, and they are dual fuel, and we see in the North Sea where there are plenty of gas stations, so to speak, and therefore it's very effective to have LNG vessels. But one of our clients are now going back to fuel or petrol because it's cheaper. And so it depends on where you are in the world. And I think Australia is the largest producer of LNG in the world, and we see Woodside Petroleum out there are very keen to use the gas that they have in plenty over there. And during the LNG conference last week, they signed a 5-year contract with us for a new LNG-fueled PSV, where they can use their own gas directly out of the field into our PSVs.
Right. China has come up a couple of times in relation to technology and innovation, and I see there's a question from the audience also about the Chinese economy. It's now such a massive impact on our industry, on the maritime industry, offshore industry, commodities, and so on. What's happening in China right now, Dave? We've got 2 China experts here. Dave, he, apart from having been at DBS for a good long while and being voted one of the best economists in the region, he taught at Fudan University in Shanghai. He taught at Guangzhou University, and he speaks Mandarin. So, what's your perspective on China and economic development at the moment?
Well, first of all, it's still growing in a very big way. I think we miss that a lot of times. When I talk about Asia putting a Germany on the map every 3 years, 2/3 of that is coming from China. So there's no way around this. China drives things more than it ever has before, and it will continue. Even though growth is going to get slower and slower and slower, we know that. The amount that it drives, the dominance that it puts out there in the global economy is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Can I just interrupt and just ask you actually specifically of a list of worries? Is it demand slowdown? Is it bad debts? Is it capital outflow?
None
or
of the
policy
above.
or policy making? Do any of
None
those?
of the policy
what concern
making,
policy
absolutely.
making?
Again, we come back to cycle versus structure. When you talk about debt and capital outflow, I forget the other one you mentioned there, those were cyclical risks, and these are what we read about most of the time in the paper. Everybody's worried about what happened to the PMI this month, is manufacturing up and down and so on. That is almost completely irrelevant. The cycle doesn't really matter that much unless you're a trader worrying about the oil price tomorrow and so on. Cycles have happened forever. They're going to happen forever. The big risk in China, and it's far bigger than the cyclical risk, is do we get on with these structural changes which have to be gotten onto? Mm-hmm. The easiest way to imagine this is to draw a picture of you know, the economy, or in your terms, going off. You know, the economy gets bigger and bigger and bigger structurally through time. And around that, you've got all these cycles, all right? And what matters is not these cycles, but whether this structure keeps going like this, or all of a sudden it takes a right turn and starts going like this. That is 1,000 times more important than these short-term things that you read about in the paper all the time.
And the policies that are being made now, do they give you confidence that these are pragmatic steps towards reforming the economy, or do they worry you that it's maybe not moving in the right direction?
It's the biggest risk in the global economy today. I mean, the list of reforms is really wide and it's really deep, and so far they've focused on the financial sector and the internationalization of the renminbi and so on. There are micro changes, there are macro changes, there are real economy changes, there are financial sector economy changes. All of this stuff has to happen, and it's a tough list. Right now, after the financial stuff that we had in the last couple of years, it's trying to clean up the bad debts, and after that, the very next thing to get on with will be, again, taking out some of the state-owned enterprises which have to be taken out of the picture. You clean this up, you move the workers off into new industries and so on. Will that happen? Will that not happen? It's like trying to predict the oil price. I mean, this is just, when you say nobody can predict the oil price, nobody can predict how successful this reform effort is going to be.
What's your perspective, SS, on this? Because you're in China a lot. You were just in Chongqing a couple of days ago. Do you feel that the policy making that's happening now is a pragmatic step towards restructuring the economy, or is there sort of philosophical shift towards more centralization?
Well, like your family, you know, we have been in China for a long time and fortunate to be involved in the Chongqing project. For those of you who are not aware that this is the third Singapore-Chinese government G2G project. First one was in Suzhou, second one was Tianjin Eco City, and third one is the cooperation on connectivity. There's a lot of questions. I agree with David. You know, sometimes when you read the report, you look at, oh, it's slowed down, the slowest in how many quarters. It's still growing. And I think, in fact, those of you who attended the Singapore Forum, DPM Taman gave a very good speech about China. He said that maybe it is the only major economy having a 5-year plan. The rest of them are going year by year, you know. While we worry about when will, you know, the Federal Reserve, when will it go up by 0.25%, whether this quarter, next quarter, that's just all irrelevant. So it's a major economy, and in fact, the growth every year is almost equal to India, in the whole GDP of India. So I think it is also a centralized dictatorship. They can change, they can fine-tune the policy very fast. And like early this year, you know, the circuit breaker that they had for the stock exchange, they actually took it out because, and they admitted a mistake. They made a mistake. The stock market stopped trading twice in 3 days. So I think they are doing a lot of reform, and the Chongqing project actually, if successful, and it will be successful, will transform the whole western region of China. And we have just been told that 1/3 of the population actually live on the coastal, 2/3 are inland, yet the coastal contribute to 2/3 of the GDP of the country. And if this and if this transformation, especially in the central, the inner part, can be successful, you can imagine the GDP will grow by 4 times, right? So I think it's difficult. There are a lot of challenges, demographic, aging population, rising healthcare costs, need to increase in the education and healthcare. But to me, I think they have a more than equal chance to succeed.
While we're still on this topic of policies, I wanted to ask you, Christian, about Brazil and more broadly, while we see capex cuts having a big impact on deep water and offshore services, how much of an impact do you see from national policies like local content, like blocking rules in Brazil and elsewhere? I mean, how much are these affecting your business in the offshore industry?
Yeah, but Brazil is an interesting place, and that's an understatement, perhaps. The problem right now is that we have a dysfunctional government. But to your question about content, I think in Brazil, as some other places in the world, local content has been embraced by many governments. In Brazil, for instance, you force the local industry to build and develop into technology that was not natural for them, and that forcing of the industry actually drove the prices so high that the industry cannot compete on the world market. And which political government wants to build an industry that cannot compete on the world market in this international world? It does not make any sense. So what we see in Brazil is that we have ended up with a cost level which is far too high. It also has a lot of protectionism of its own operating of the oil industry, for instance, which has driven the oil operating cost higher than in Norway, for instance, in many instances. At the same time, you have millions out of work, so you can question the policy of the government also from that point of view. But the overall picture in Brazil is that there are huge reserves, there's a huge production today, and Brazil has a national oil company that is handling that production with a lot of intelligent, able engineers, and that will continue. But there is an opportunity lost today, again by lack of leadership. So if Petrobras can get proper leadership, and that won't happen till they get the proper government, then it's a fabulous organization that can actually take the company and indeed the country to a new height.
And on this, in the same vein, we have a question from the audience about the role of national oil companies versus international oil companies. How do you see the difference? Now, you talked about collaborative approach, and you named a few companies that Subsea 7 is working closely on a collaborative approach. Do you see a difference between national oil companies and IOCs now? And before you answer that, I should just say we're about 3/4 of the way through the panel, and we have a poll. We have these 2 poll results, which we're going to post on the screen, one in a moment after Christian answers this question, which is about which of these kind of very troubled sectors that we see now are going to come out first. And then at the end, we have a question about when oil is going to get back above $70, which is one of these wild guesses. But they say actually a collective group. What do they say? The wisdom of crowds, right? When you have a lot of people guessing on a number, it's often very accurate. So we're going to test all of you to see where oil is going to be or how long it's going to take to return. Please do have a look at these poll questions, and we'll put the first one up in 2 minutes. But Christian, IOCs versus NOCs.
Yes. Do I see a difference? Yes, I do. Let me go back to the fact, when I see an organization like Exxon, I see the people, they come to meetings, they are few people, they have prepared themselves well, and the meeting is to the point and short. I come to a state oil company, and they are hordes of people. They have all the time in the world, and after 3 hours we've finished, and I'm about to go back to the airport and take my flight and say, are you not staying for dinner or for lunch? We have set aside the whole day. So it's a lack of the free enterprise and the private sector drive in the oil companies, which is no surprise. It's a human nature that comes out when you have less of pressure of accountability in the organization. Having said that, I think national oil companies are there. They fill a number of functions, and the question for them is to find the right balance. And we see that most of the national oil companies around the world, they are resorting to cooperation with the private sector. They're allowing in the private sector. Look at Pemex, or Mexico is opening up to the private sector. Look at Brazil. Indeed, even in Norway, you see that Statoil is they have a hugely dominating position, but there is a whole spectrum of other operators there, and that I think is a trend that will continue.
Okay. Shall we go to the first poll, if you'd like to put it on the screen, the organizers, who are saying that shipbuilding, I hope there aren't too many shipbuilders in the room, shipbuilding is going to be the last to emerge. Only 2% think that shipbuilding is going to be the first to emerge. Dry bulk seems to be the winner, is going to come out first. 42% of you think dry bulk will emerge first. And containers and offshore are level pegging at around 28%. Some votes for shipbuilding coming in last minute. Okay, well, thank you for your input on that. It's good to see that people feel that some sectors are going to emerge hopefully before too long. And this was my next kind of area of questioning, picking up one of the audience questions about winners and losers. What is going to distinguish the winners and the losers through this cycle? SS?
When I attended the Lloyd's meeting in Hong Kong last week, we actually had a very interesting. Well, the chairman of the Lloyd's East Asia, J.B. raised me, actually invited David Palmer from Singapore, who is a veteran, to give a presentation on the whole shipping industry, especially oil and gas. And I guess in the Chinese Weiji is there's crisis, but there's also opportunity. To me, life has to go on. Shipping or offshore is necessary part of our livelihood. So there will be winners emerging, but it's when the storm is so heavy, but there should be sunshine at the end. It's only when. And in fact, it's that when the going get tough, it's only the tough one that come out. Mm-hmm. So I do believe that there will be winners, there will be maybe a lot of losers. Very painful losses. People will be affected, including the staff and all that. So I think and Asia, as David said, is still the growth center. But of course, many Asian operators still have a lot to learn to improve the standard. So I think there will be opportunity in Asia and a place like Singapore, where I think if we can continue to attract talent to come into our industry, and especially the young one, then I think we can have a good chance of grooming winners from Singapore.
From a bank perspective, Dave, how are banks thinking about winners and losers? Because and I know you're on the economic side as opposed to the banking side, but just thinking also about impact on the banks of this turmoil in the energy industry. How do you see banks reacting? How badly do you think they're going to be hit, and how do you see them responding and reacting and picking winners and losers?
I'm not a bank analyst by any means, so it's tough for me to say, and I won't speak about DBS per se, but in general, banks tend to be very far behind the curve when these things come. They're surprised when the downturn comes, and when the upturn comes, they're very cautious, and they wait and wait and wait. So I wouldn't be surprised if that plays out again this time around.
Right. How do you see it, Christian? We were talking earlier about banks and how they're thinking about.
No question that the banks have a role to play here now. The problem is that the whole banking industry, as I see it, has got themselves boxed in over time because of all the regulations. They are so afraid of violating any rules that a lot of the authority that was delegated down into the organization to good bankers who had a good feel for the industry, a good feel for the clients, that authority is not there anymore. The authority goes back up to, I'm not quite sure where it goes to, but it's some high up, or into some models. They have a lot of computer models that dictate how to approach things and how to price things, etc. And that is a handicap that the banks have, and of course the successful banks will be those who can deal with all the regulation in an efficient way. Also, it's difficult for the bankers to take the lead in actually merging companies together or force an owner who has been a client for generation to actually take a totally different approach. But I think that the banks can be very helpful if there are some leaders in the industry who stake out a way forward in consolidating the industry and causing a structural change to the industry that is clearly needed. Then I think the banks should support it rather than look for short-term band-aids to bridge the short-term cash needs. And the winners of this industry will be the winners who have the leadership that are prepared to realistically assess the problems and take action early. I say to my team, now is a wonderful time, it's an exciting time, because now, boys and girls, you can prove what you are able to do. When you have a strong market, you have all the fair weather leaders who sit there and count and control the bank statement. That's easy. In good times, everybody can be a manager. Now is the time we can prove what we can do.
And on this point, what are some of the opportunities that you see out there? Because many sectors of shipping and offshore are suffering, and on the one hand, we need to act defensively to protect business values, and on the other hand, we need to be thinking about the next phase of growth. You know, what are some of the opportunities? I guess you referred to alliances and cost savings. You know, what would you be encouraging everyone out here to be thinking about for new opportunities coming now?
We can take another example, which is the OSV space, in addition to the alliances and so forth that I've talked about already. For 10 years, I've been visiting with the OSV owners. Large portion of the world OSV owners are based in Norway and in the United States. I know there are plenty in the Far East also, but I didn't go that far. I went to the ones in Norway and in the States. And when times were good, nobody wanted to talk about merger and creating a larger organization and thereby save cost and have more dynamics and better interaction with the clients, etc. They were very comfortable on their own, and control was more important. Now it's a completely different situation. It's a distressed situation in the OSV space, and I think those owners who realize that they cannot do it on their own and realize that early, and therefore be open to think completely differently and contribute to a consolidation and therefore changing the structure of this very fragmented industry, I think that is exciting. And it's an opportunity for all, also for the smaller companies who then become a smaller owner in a bigger and more dynamic company.
Thank you. I think we have one more poll. We're reaching the end, and then I'm going to do a rapid-fire question for each of the panelists on what your single biggest concern and what you see as the sort of the bright spark to leave us on an optimistic note, what you think we should be focusing on the positive side, and also, you know, as a main concern. But let's go to the oil price question, which is how many years expected before the oil price rebounds back to above 70? And you'll remember I started introducing Christian by talking about your sort of open-mindedness to the fact that it might come much lower than 60. Now we're thinking, when is it going to go back above 70? And the majority, 40%, close to 40%, think in 2 to 3 years from now. And then a fairly even spread amongst the others. So we have to hang in there, certainly in the offshore industry, for another 2 to 3 years. How many of us are going to be left, Christian? Another 2 to 3 years if prices stay low. Okay, let me wrap up maybe by asking each of you, you know, global economy or Asian economy, Dave, major concern and major bright spark?
Major concern has to be China's structural change and reforms. It's a tough thing to do. China is so much bigger than they used to be. I mean, you go back to 1978 when Deng Xiaoping came in and made the big changes. China's 30 times bigger than it was back then, which it makes doing these kind of changes in some sense 30 times more difficult. That's the big tough one. The big bright spot is again China and this idea of a one road, one belt, one road thing. Most everybody is familiar with this now. It's a big, giant 21st century Silk Road which goes north, south, east, west, and just kind of links all of Asia and Europe, North Asia, South Asia, everything. To me, this is the biggest thing going out there. It's a big, giant investment package for the region for 20 years. And if China can push this and get the other countries on board with this, this is by far and away the biggest bright spot to me.
Thank you. SS?
Yes, I agree what David said. This is one belt, one road, and but I think it's how China going to play it and how the world perceive it. But the last 3 weeks I've been in and out of China. What I'm hearing different things now. Like this morning, the party sack of Fujian, and last week the party sack of Chongqing. They are talking about actually learning from Singapore on financial discipline, how the stock market work, on logistic rules, and also various, to me, the soft part, the software of the of how to do business, in a way preparing for them to 走出去, going out of the doorstep. So I think for that, to me, I agree with David, the concern and all that. I think, but for me, for Singapore in particular, it is a very good chance for Singapore company to actually work with the Chinese to make the one belt, one road. It's not going to be a 10, 20, it's going to be a century of projects, right? To make it successful. So there's opportunity for big and small companies in Singapore to work, for the Chinese to actually learn and work together to create, to me, an external wing for China and also external wing for Singapore. So to me, that is maybe a bright spot, challenges, but also a bright spot for Singapore company. After all, we are a Singapore-based company, Singapore-owned company. So I think there are opportunities going ahead, even though the going is very tough now. So I think I'm hearing a different tone from China, and they realize that by working with Singapore, in fact, the going can be easier, and whether it's going to Australasia, to other part of Asia, or even to Africa, Middle East. So to me, I think that there's a lot of things that we can do, and I believe that Singapore can benefit from this initiative.
Thank you. Christian?
Yes, I do. From an industry perspective, rather than a global economy point of view, the industry needs to have talent and people. And if the downturn stays, or the activity level stays down for too long, then you'll find all the contractors downsizing to the point where it will affect the ability and the skill in the organization. And of course we are at the extreme end when it comes to complexity in Subsea 7, and we see the importance not only to have good people who are good engineers, they understand the business, but it's also a question of these people working well together as teams in the complex project execution. And we have got that right in Subsea 7. I hope we don't have to cut back in order to stay cash positive to the point where we affect our abilities. That's one concern. And the other concern I have is that to get through this downturn without destroying values more than necessary, we need the banks to act. And I hope that they will be efficient enough so that they can establish a degree of predictability quickly. And when you think about lending syndicates, there may be 5 or 10 or sometimes 20 banks, and when they all have their own opinions, I urge them to actually step back a little bit and not take the approach that they want to practice good banking as if nothing had happened and as if they were looking at the new loan. So those are my two concerns, but am I hopeful about this industry? As I said, yes, there will be need for our oil and gas for a long time. It's an industry that has the ability to adjust like no other industry. And we have also had the cleanup of some of the waste in the industry. Yes, there has been a lot of waste. We saw on 2 projects alone, there were $100 billion cost overrun. They were big projects, but also in percentage terms, they were huge cost overruns. And that is because our approach wasn't right. I think we have learned something now. We are taking a different approach, so we'll come out of this tunnel as a stronger industry, I believe.
Great, thank you. Well, that's probably a very optimistic note to be ending on, and I'd like to wrap up by thanking the panel for your participation today. Thank you so much for your insights, and many thanks to you, Christian, for your insightful lecture. We're obviously in a dramatic down cycle, but there are things that we can do, and you'll remember through the lecture the sort of cost focus and improvement, alliances, and a more collaborative interaction with customers and peers, and technological improvements. But I think the most important kind of takeaway note that I certainly got is it's a time that really needs leadership, and where we have to act to make these things happen, because we can talk about innovation and alliances and cost leadership, but actually we need to go out and do it. So thank you very much for that insight. Thank you to all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our moderator, Mr Sohmen-Pao, as well as our 3 panelists, Mr Siem, Mr Chiu, as well as Mr Corbett, a big round of applause for leading such an engaging panel discussion for us all.